Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. And today we have the finale of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. A story where we've seen the setup, and we've seen the voyage where the young lady has traveled in search of her prince. The prince who lives in a castle east of the sun and west of the moon, and who is to marry in a very few days' time a princess with a nose 3 L's long. Where we left our young heroine, she had traveled not only to the old women who live in the hills, but to the north, south, east, and west winds, and is now sitting with the north wind and about to embark on the final leg of her journey. And like every good story, she's past the journey and is on to the trials. This is East of the Sun and West of the Moon, Part 3. The north wind woke her betimes next morning, and puffed himself up, and made himself so big and so strong that it was frightful to see him, and away they went, high up through the air, as if they would not stop until they had reached the very end of the world. Down below there was such a storm. It blew down woods and houses, and when they were above the seas, the ships were wrecked by the hundreds. And thus they tore on, and a long time went by, and then yet more time passed, and still they were above the sea, and the north wind grew tired and more tired, and at last so utterly weary that he was scarcely able to blow any longer, and he sank and sank, lower and lower, until at last he went so low that the waves dashed against the heels of the poor girl he was carrying. "Art thou afraid?" said the north wind. "I have no fear," said she, and it was true. But they were not very, very far from land, and there was just enough strength left in the north wind to enable him to throw her onto the shore, immediately under the windows of a castle, which lay east of the sun and west of the moon. But then he was so weary and worn out that he was forced to rest for several days before he could go to his own home again. Next morning she sat down beneath the walls of the castle to play with the golden apple, and the first person she saw was the maiden with the long nose who was to have the prince. "How much do you want for that gold apple of yours, girl?" said she, opening the window. "It can't be bought for either gold or money," answered the girl. "If it cannot be bought for either gold or money, what will buy it? You may say what you please," said the princess. "Well, if I may go to the prince who is here and be with him tonight, you shall have it," said the girl who had come with the north wind. "You may do that," said the princess, for she had made up her mind what she would do. So the princess got the golden apple, but when the girl went up to the prince's apartment that night he was asleep, for the princess had so contrived it. The poor girl called to him and shook him, and between whiles she wept, but she could not wake him. In the morning, as soon as day dawned, in came the princess with the long nose and drove her out again. In the daytime she sat down once more beneath the windows of the castle and began to card with the golden carding comb, and then all happened as it had happened before. The princess asked what she wanted for it, and she replied that it was not for sale either for gold or money, but that if she would get leave to go to the prince and be with him during the night, she should have it. But when she went up to the prince's room he was again asleep, and let her call him or shake him or weep as she would, he still slept on, and she could not put any life in him. When daylight came in the morning, the princess with the long nose came too, and once more drove her away. When day had quite come, the girl seated herself under the castle windows to spin with her golden spinning wheel, and the princess with the long nose wanted to have that also. So she opened the window and asked what she would take for it. The girl said what she had said on each of the former occasions, that it was not for sale either for gold or for money, but if she could get leave to go to the prince who lived there and be with him during the night, she should have it. "Yes," said the princess, "I will gladly consent to that." But in that place there were some Christian folk who had been carried off, and they had been sitting in the chamber which was next to that of the prince, and had heard how a woman had been in there who had wept and called on him 2 nights running, and they told the prince of this. So that evening, when the princess came once more with her sleeping drink, he pretended to drink, but threw it away behind him, for he suspected that it was a sleeping drink. So when the girl went into the prince's room this time, he was awake, and she had to tell him how she had come there. "You have come just in time," said the prince, "for I should have been married tomorrow, but I will not have the long-nosed princess, and you alone can save me. I will say that I want to see what my bride can do, and bid her wash the shirt which has the 3 drops of tallow on it. This she will consent to do, for she does not know that it was you who let them fall on it. But no one can wash them out but one born of Christian folk. It cannot be done by one of a pack of trolls, and then I will say that no one shall ever be my bride but the woman who can do this, and I know that you can." There was great joy and gladness between them all that night, but the next day, when the wedding was to take place, the prince said, "I must see what my bride can do." "That you may do," said the stepmother. "I have a fine shirt which I want to wear as my wedding shirt, but 3 drops of tallow have been got upon it, which I want to have washed off, and I have vowed to marry no one but the woman who is able to do it. If she cannot do that, she's not worth having." Well, that was a very small matter, they thought, and agreed to it. The princess with the long nose began to wash as well as she could, but the more she washed and rubbed, the larger the spots grew. "Ah, you can't wash it at all," said the old troll hag who was her mother. "Give it to me." But she, too, had not had the shirt very long in her hands before it looked worse still, and the more she washed it and rubbed it, the larger and blacker grew the spots. So the other trolls had to come and wash, but the more they did, the blacker and uglier grew the shirt, until at length it was as black as if it had been up the chimney. "Oh," cried the prince, "not one of you is good for anything at all. There is a beggar girl sitting outside the window, and I'll be bound that she can wash better than any of you. Come in, you girl there," he cried. And so she came in. "Can you wash this shirt clean?" he cried. "Oh, I don't know," she said, "but I will try." And no sooner had she taken the shirt and dipped it in the water than it was white as driven snow, and even whiter than that. "I will marry you," said the prince. Then the old troll hag flew into such a rage that she burst. And the princess with the long nose and all the little trolls must have burst too, for they have never been heard of since. The prince and his bride set all the Christian folk who were imprisoned there free, and took away with each of them all the gold and silver that they could carry, and moved far away from the castle, which lay east of the sun and west of the moon. And that is the conclusion of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. And we see that the princess, well, now princess, was successful in reclaiming her love. And while the end does seem a little rushed, given the build-up of the travel, it still is a rather good ending. An interesting ending, but a pretty good one, I think. This is Dan Scholz for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.